Are you as fascinated by scary stories and true crime as I am? Maybe it's time for you to make your own podcast. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First off, it's free, which is awesome. There's also creation tools that allow you to edit and record your own podcast right from your phone, like I'm doing now, or computer. Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Hello, and welcome to Tales After Dark. This is a podcast that will be filled with scary stories and diving deep into the world's most treacherous cult crimes. Many of the paranormal and let's not meet scary stories heard here are from articles I have found on Reddit. Author information and usernames will always be included in the show notes below each episode. To submit a terrifying tale of your own, please email stories.talesafterdark@gmail.com and make sure to follow /TAD podcast on Reddit for Tales After Dark fan subreddit information. This show is brought to you by the MW Network and produced by me, your host, Emma Dawn. Do you have a podcast or show idea of your own? For more information on the MW Network, visit themommywines.com. Tales After Dark is made possible by our sponsors, the Home Bookkeeper Masterclass. Looking to create a life of balance and financial freedom? Check out how I was able to ditch the 9-to-5 grind and spend more time creating and doing the things I love by becoming a home bookkeeper. More information on the Home Bookkeeper Masterclass can be found on my company website, edjconsultinggroup.com, under Resources. Zaya Active. What's better than curling up in a nice pair of leggings and your Tales After Dark merch sweatshirt and listening to a spooky tale? In my completely biased opinion, not much. Visit myzaya.com/EmmaDawn for premium and affordable men and women's active and loungewear, and make sure to check out the Tales After Dark merch store on teespring.com. If you are a brand and would like to sponsor the Tales After Dark podcast, please get in touch at stories.talesafterdark@gmail.com. Now let's get into today's episode. Thank you all for listening. This is the final episode of Family Secrets, Part 6. The sight of the Dijon climbing over the fence was a solid punch to the gut, knocking us out of the shock that had set in after we saw Uncle Barney's corpse being dragged across the bumpy ground. His now fast-drying blood stained the yellow grass. Dad was the first to move. He drew his pistol up, aiming at the charred monstrosity as quickly as he could, but he wasn't nearly fast enough. The Dijon let go of Uncle Barney's leg after he had crossed over to our side and tossed the shotgun into the air, grabbed it by its barrel, and swung it like a baseball bat. The butt end of the gun connected with Dad's wrist with a gut-churning thwack. Dad screamed, dropped the gun, and fell to his knees, clutching his wrist with the other hand. The Dijon roared, and it shot paralyzing fear up my spine. But looking at Dad groaning on his knees was enough to get me moving again, rather quick this time. I pulled my own gun up and prepared to fire off a shot at the Dijon by swifting just a bit to my right. The Dijon swung the shotgun baton again. Dad ducked, and it sailed harmlessly over his head. He flung himself at the oozing monster, slamming his shoulder into the Dijon's torso, sending them both crashing into the stump. The monster yelped, rolling, and brought his blackened fist down on my father's back, again and again and again, slamming them into his spine with a sickening impact of hammers pounding a cracked anvil. Dad grunted, but didn't give in. He took the blows even as they rocked his body, and when the Dijon paused for a second to catch his breath, he began raining down punches of his own on the white outline of the monster's ribs. I ran and positioned myself off to their side. Dropping down on one knee, I raised the gun and began waiting for Dad to give me a clear line of sight. For that one moment, one straight shot through the monster's forehead. But that moment never came. Their fight grew more and more chaotic. As they fought and struggled and wrestled, they became an entangled mess of flesh and bones. And even thinking about firing my gun was now out of the question. So I charged at them. I dropped the gun and picked up a pointy rock and ran towards Dad and the beast he was fighting. I was close to them now, so close I could smell the stench of roasted flesh emanating from the Dijon's body. See the tar-like pus trickle down his dark red muscles. Scalp tingling with anxiety, I prepared to jump into the fray. And then that moment arrived. They rolled and the Dijon swifted to come out on top, wrapped his large hands around Dad's skull and began squeezing, like he wanted to pop it like a watermelon. I let out a powerful, rage-filled scream and swung my hand as fast as I could, slamming the rock into the Dijon's skull. It pierced the bones and sank into his brain with a wet crunch. He stopped, dazed. I hit him again. He swooned and I swung again. But he was waiting for me this time, caught my hand mid-air and twisted it. I yelped and the stone fell through my hand. Stars speckled my vision, and I staggered and fell backwards. A sharp pain exploded in my head. I blinked rapidly. He had backhanded me with enough force to almost knock me out. The Dijon roared again, each discordant note of that noise like needles piercing my eardrums. But this one wasn't a declaration of rage. No, it was induced by pain. The Dijon was hurt. As his screams faded away, a gentle humming filled the air. It was gentle, peaceful, and washed over me with the warmth of a fireplace on a cold winter evening. I frowned and pulled myself up on my elbows to see what had just happened. It was Dad. While I had the Dijon distracted, he managed to pull out the dagger from his waistband of his jeans and stabbed the monster with it. The blade sank into the rotting flesh, right up to the silver hilt, and began emitting a bright orange glow. Dad twisted the blade. The Dijon screamed again, his lidless eyes showing fear for the first time. Dad yanked out the blade, stabbed him again, this time right in the gap beneath the sternum. With a groan that escaped out his decaying mouth, with all the air in his lungs, the Dijon collapsed on top of Dad, who pushed him off with great effort and began taking in deep, anxious breaths. I immediately jumped into his arms, crying and blubbering uncontrollably. "It's okay," he whispered. "It's over now." My body would not stop shaking, even as a moldy comb of relief was beginning to wiggle its way past the tension, turning my stomach in knots. "Is it really over?" I asked. "Yes," Dad answered, showing me the dagger. This was the only thing that could hurt him, and I got it good. No way he survives that. I nodded. It was over. The nightmare that had haunted our family for decades was finally coming to an end, or so I thought. Sometimes things take a turn for the worst, just when you're expecting it all to get better. It's darkest right before the dawn, isn't it? What if dawn never comes, and the world is blanketed in darkness for all eternity? I was helping Dad get onto his feet when a low giggle pierced through the air. I froze, looked at Dad, wide-eyed. He was shocked too. Together we glanced at the Dijon's corpse, but he lay motionless. Someone giggled again. With my heart threatening to leap right out of my mouth, I turned my neck and looked at where Uncle Barney's corpse lay. His chest rumbled with laughter. "Oh my God," Dad whispered. Uncle Barney shot to his feet like a bullet, turned and faced us. A vicious grin slapped on his face. My head swam. There was a giant hole in his chest, probably from a shotgun. "Hey there, Sierra," he said, his voice hoarse. "Looks like we finally meet." I looked back at the Dijon's corpse at our feet and choked back a gasp. It finally clicked, like the last piece of a puzzle sliding into place. How the Dijon was able to cross the fence. Dear God, why didn't we think of this? At our feet, instead of a charred corpse of the Dijon, lay the dead body of Uncle Barney. Dad looked at him with his mouth dropped open. The Dijon, who was standing in front of us, giggled again. It's poetic, isn't it? Brother killing brother. Almost seems religious. No, no, no. He thought he had killed me? The Dijon snorted. Dragged me all the way over here to show the monster's body to his frightened little niece. And what does he do? And what does he see when he gets here? Oh, poor little Sierra, standing right next to the monster he thought he had just killed. Poor bastard couldn't take it, screamed in rage, and charged at the Dijon, his brother, while tossing the real Dijon over the fence he had so carefully constructed. You bastard, Dad swore through his clenched teeth. I didn't even have to do anything, Freddie. You did it yourself. Killed your poor brother with your own hands. Impressive, really. My stomach dropped. Just when I thought I had made it out of the dark hole I was in, I found myself sinking deeper and deeper into the abyss. I couldn't even look at Dad. To kill your own brother with your own hands. No man should ever have to go through that. Come on, Sierra, the Dijon urged, still wearing my uncle's face. It's over. No one else has to get hurt. Come with me, and I'll let your dad live. It's time to make good on your mom's promise. Run and hide in the basement, Sierra, Dad said, pushing me behind with his legs. Have it your way then, the Dijon said. He made a show of cracking his neck and began advancing towards us. Dad lifted the dagger in front of him in a threatening manner. Get back inside while I have him distracted. The talisman will protect you. I didn't reply. No way was I going inside. I had sworn to myself that if he had died, so will I. No hiding like a coward. Not anymore. The Dijon volleyed a punch at my dad, who raised his hand to block it, but it was easily swatted aside. The fist slammed into the side of his head, sending him reeling. Dad shook his head and tried to slash the Dijon with the dagger. I began fidgeting. What do I do? How can I help? If I jumped in right now, I'll only end up getting in the way. No. So what? There has to be a way for me to help. I began looking around. My eyes fell upon the stump, and suddenly something clicked. When Dad had thrown himself at the Dijon, and they had both slammed into the stump, the monster yelped. Touching the wood had hurt him. But why? He had easily crossed over the fence when Uncle Barney had brought him in, and the sheets hadn't hurt him at all. Maybe there was something different about the stump, something more powerful, and that's why Uncle Barney's friend Liam had insisted on keeping it there. I dashed towards the stump, positioned it in between me and the Dijon, and began pushing. It wouldn't budge. It was so heavy. I remembered that it had taken both Dad and Uncle Barney to move this thing. I was just a little girl. Fuck that. Don't give up, I told myself. I pushed it again, this time near the top. It began to tip over, and I got down on my knees and pushed it again. It scraped against the mud surrounding it. I pushed, and I pushed it again. Yes! It wobbled and tipped over, allowing me to begin to roll it towards the Dijon. The curve made it much easier to push, and my arms were no longer crying out for relief. Inch by inch, I brought it closer to where my dad was fighting the Dijon. I could hear them struggling. The grunts and yells, the sound of flesh hitting bones, urging me to push harder. And then Dad screamed. My head shot up. I trembled at what I saw. The Dijon had taken the dagger from Dad and stabbed him in the stomach with it. No! I screeched as Dad began to fall on the Dijon, who pulled the blood-stained dagger out and stabbed him again. As Dad rested in the Dijon's shoulder, his eyes caught mine. Blood began to pool in his mouth. His lips gently curved into a smile. I recognized that smile. It was the one that he'd given me many times. At night when I was afraid of the dark, after scraping my knees or falling from my bike, when I had told him about being bullied at school, he'd always smile at me and tell me it would be okay. But for the first time ever, that smile seemed like a lie. Things were not going to be okay, ever. With one last burst of strength, Dad grabbed the Dijon by the hand holding the dagger in his stomach and pulled him down to the side. The Dijon's head slammed into the stump and he screamed, like he was being buried alive. He began to writhe to try to free himself, but Dad held him in place. I knew what I had to do then. I knew that it would destroy everything, but it needed to be done. I jumped and reached for the dagger embedded in Dad's flesh. I pulled it out, fighting back tears as blood squirted out of his wounds and splattered on the grass. The Dijon began to move, but I sank the blade into his chest. His torso quaked, like an electric current had ran through his body. I pulled the dagger out and stabbed him again, and he roared, weaker this time. The dagger hummed in my hand, gave out a bright orange glow, but I was too focused on killing the bastard to bask in it. He tried to fight me off, but was too weak to do so. The stump, the dagger, the talisman around my neck, all came together to create the perfect opportunity to put him down for good. Stab, 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 stab. I kept on stabbing until his chest had turned into a gooey black mess. He was dead long before I lit up and pulled my hands away from it. They were completely soaked in the disgusting black and red blood oozing from the now dead Dijon. I turned to look at Dad, bit back a sob, and hurried over to him. I wish I could say that I got to talk to him one last time, that I cradled his head in my lap and told him I loved him, that he replied with that he was proud of me, that I got to see him smile again, one last time. But he was gone, left behind his cold, pale corpse, punctured full of holes. Warm brown eyes rolled into the back of his skull. I sat down on the ground, slumped against the stump, surrounded by 3 dead bodies, and allowed myself to cry my heart's content, to grieve, to let despair wash over me, to let it seep into my bones and nestle into a dark, deep corner of my soul. After my tear ducts ran dry and my throat felt parched and hoarse, I retrieved my phone and called my Aunt Emily. I didn't have the heart to tell her what had happened, but she could tell from my voice. The awkward silence she responded with broke me all over again. An immense wave of guilt struck me, and I began apologizing, hoping she wouldn't hate me for getting Uncle Barney killed. She told me she loved me. I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. She said she was going to come pick me up, and that she really loved me, and that she was glad I was okay. After the call, I took the boat and crossed the lake to go to Mr. Shaw's house. As the boat cut across the clear surface of the lake, I wiped my tears and collected myself to make them all proud, to make their sacrifices matter. Dad, Mom, Uncle Barney, I was going to live a life they could take pride in. Although I was orphaned, I was still alive. That is the end of part 6 and the end of Family Secrets. If you like this story, let me know. Send me a voice memo, and it might end up in the next episode. And until the next story, stay spooky.